To wrap up this series on faith, I want to talk to you about the most common way that God shows his faithfulness to us in our lives. The most common way. We rarely, if ever, actually see or witness miracles. Technically, a miracle is a violation of one of the laws of nature. Getting ready to go on vacation and saying, maybe I need to get those brakes checked. And sure enough, the mechanic said, oh, they would have failed you up in the mountains. That's not a miracle. There's no laws of nature violated. That's God providing for us and watching over us, but within the bounds of the natural law. There's an old-fashioned word for that, and this is the way that we see God working in our lives most often, a really old-fashioned word. And it's called providence. The providing of God. The providence of God. Now, we may not use that word, but we see it. We see it all the time. We rarely see his hand as it's working, but we turn around and look and we see his fingerprints on everything that's happened. The providence of God. It's like a big father taking the roof off of a dollhouse and reaching in and rearranging the people and the furniture as he wishes. He does not appear in the dollhouse, but his influence is evident because his fingerprints are all over everything he does. There's a book in the Bible that illustrates God's providence. Interestingly, it's a book in the Bible in which the name of God is never mentioned. There's absolutely no reference to God. But when you look at what happened and how things turned out, you see the fingerprints of God all over it. It's the book of Esther. And I'd like to tell you the story of the book of Esther through the eyes of a minor character. His name's Harbona. And he shows up in the book several different times. And what would this character, Harbona, never hearing the word of God, never looking for divine intervention, how would he interpret God's providing? My name is Harbona. My job? Well, in England, I'd be called a gentleman's valet. In your country, I'd be called a male private secretary. In my country, in Persia, I am Harbona, chamberlain to King Xerxes, king of Persia. You might also know him as Ahasuerus. I wasn't sure I wanted the job because Xerxes is unpredictable. One moment he's your best friend and everything's going well, and the next moment he turns on you and you're done. For example, there was this high government official named Pythias. And he offered Xerxes $4 million to fund a military campaign. And Xerxes was so moved by that he refused to take the money, and he gave Pythias a gift. And later, when Pythias hinted that maybe his oldest son could be excused from the campaign, Xerxes went off. He cut the boy in half and marched his entire army between the two pieces. You never know with Xerxes. There was a storm in the sea, and he lost 300 ships. He took a leather strap and went down and stood in the sea and slapped the sea 300 times, one for each ship. Never know with Xerxes. But I decided I could do it, and the way that I was going to survive was I would do everything I could to get along with him. Just go with the flow. Don't create any ripples. Just go with the flow. Keep your head down, keep your mouth shut, go with the flow. But I want to tell you about some particular things that have happened recently. Xerxes was trying to take over Greece, and we were doing very well with the battle. And then what we call the Bay of Salamis fiasco. Xerxes' entire fleet was wiped out. He had to sneak home on a fishing boat. When he got home, he was not in the best mood. He moped around the palace. He didn't want to do anything. He didn't want to see anybody. He was doing nothing. And then he started talking about Vashti. Vashti, poor Vashti. Oh, I did Vashti wrong. Oh, poor Vashti. And it was an unfortunate affair. Vashti was the previous queen that he'd gotten rid of, and probably quite unfairly. But there's no turning back. And so I'm thinking to myself, what can we do? There's got to be something that we could do to get him in a better mood. And then it came to me. Women. And lots of them. And so when the time was right, I said to Xerxes, I have an idea, Xerxes. Why don't we gather together the most beautiful virgins in the land and bring them all to the palace? And you can get to know them. And maybe you'll find a new queen. That perked him right up. And within a few days, the palace was just overrun with beautiful girls. And he met every one of them. And he was doing pretty well. And then he started seeing more and more of one until it became clear that she was the one. Her name was Esther. And I think he chose the right one. Although there was something about her I couldn't quite put my finger on. She really didn't look Persian. But anyway, he was happy. And things went much better for a while. And then about 5 years later, Xerxes is holding court, and in pops Haman. Now, Haman was a fast-rising star in the State Department. He had risen to the point where he was number 2 in the land. And he pops in and he says, "Oh, King Xerxes, I want to talk to you about something because we have trouble with a troublesome people in our midst. They're odd. They follow their own laws and they don't care for the laws of Persia, the laws that you have created. And I think you've tolerated them long enough, and it's in your best interest that we get rid of them." And Xerxes said, "Fine, do it." Didn't say, "Who are we talking about? How are we going to do it?" He just said, "Fine, do it." And that really didn't surprise me because he was that way sometimes. What surprised me was Haman. I never really liked Haman. There was just something greasy about him. And he has never been solicitous of the king's welfare. And here, when he told Xerxes that he was going to wipe out the people, he offered to provide his own money, and Xerxes said, "Keep your money, use government funds." And Haman had never been the one to use his own money, so I knew if he was saying this, he was going to get something out of it. Well, I have a friend that's a tutor for Haman's kids. And he told me what was going on. We have in Persia a citizens' council. And it's made up of one representative from every group, from every nationality that's within the Persian Empire. And they meet together all the time, and they decide matters that are weighty enough to be brought before the king. And part of Haman's responsibility as number 2 in charge was to occasionally pop in on the group, do the official handshake and endorsement, and just see how everything's going. But mostly it was an opportunity for him to show up and kind of show off as being number 2 in the land. But when Haman would walk into the council meetings, all the representatives would bow down on the ground in front of him, except for the Jewish representative, who just sat in his seat and looked at him. And that got under Haman's skin. All right, Mr. Jewish representative, I'll get you. Your people too. And so Haman was setting out to destroy an entire nationality because of one fellow they had an issue with. It didn't make sense to me. As I understood it, the Jewish representatives not bowing down had something to do with his religion, and we Persians have always been very tolerant of other people's religions. But Haman was determined. I saw the decree. On the 13th of December, everyone was given free license to kill Jews, in fact, urged to kill Jews, men, women, children, old people, and then they could help themselves to the Jews' property. And they pretty well covered what they meant by kill, because it actually said kill, destroy, and annihilate. That ought to do it. A couple days later, I was walking on the second floor of the palace, and I heard some commotion outside a window, and I looked out, and there was a man screaming and wailing and moaning, and I thought, somebody's got to get that guy away from the palace. His face was all dirty, covered in ash stains, his clothes were torn. And so I started heading down to try to get rid of him. And as I was going down, I ran into Haytak. Haytak was the Queen's personal attendant. And he was heading downstairs, and he was carrying a bunch of clothes. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "The Queen sent me down to take these clothes to the guy out there." I said, "Oh, well, okay, fine. If you're gonna take care of it, I won't worry about it." And I thought, that Esther, what a sweetheart, giving clothes to some miserable bum. She's quite a gal. A little bit later, I saw Haytak, and he looked like he was sitting on a powder keg. Harbona. Yeah. You're not going to believe what's going on. What? The guy gave me a piece of paper to take to Esther. It was a copy of the decree. Harbona. She's a Jew. Oh. I didn't think she looked Persian. And there's more. The guy down there, it's her uncle, Mordecai. He's the Jewish representative. Oh, he does have something to cry about. And when I gave it to her, she sent me back down to tell him she can't. She can't go see Xerxes. He hasn't called for her for over a month. I know, he's in one of his moods. And if he doesn't, it's just not the right time. And she had me go down and tell the representative, Mordecai, she had me go down and tell him she can't. And he sent me back to tell her, you know, this may be the only reason that you're queen for such a time as this. So what's she going to do? She's going to go see Xerxes. The next day, the king was holding court, and a side door opened, and in came Esther. And man, she looked good. She was put together. She was gorgeous. Xerxes saw her, put his scepter down right away, which means you can approach the king. She went up to him, and she did something that no one else in the entire kingdom could ever do and live. She touched the end of the scepter. Very precious and intimate thing. No one else dared. And in doing that, she softened his heart, and he looked at her, and he could tell she was troubled. And he said, Esther? He can be real gentle when he wants to. He said, Esther. Esther, what's wrong? And she said, and I thought she's going to come out with it. But she didn't. She said, I've catered a special lunch today in my chambers, and I'd like to invite you and Haman. The king said, sure. But is there anything I can do for you? She said, I'll see you at lunch. It was a good lunch. They talked and they wined and dined, and they had their desserts, a little bit of coffee after the dessert. And then the king says, what can I do for you? I know something's wrong. What can I do for you? And I thought, here it comes. But it didn't. She said, I'd like for you to come back and do this again tomorrow. And the king said, okay. Haman, of course, was having the time of his life, hobnobbing with the royalty. She said, I'd like for you to come back tomorrow. I didn't get it. It didn't make any sense to me. What would be different tomorrow from today? But it turns out, if she'd have said what she needed to say on the first lunch, it had been too soon. After Haman went home, I learned from the tutor, he was high as a kite. He was so proud of himself, getting to have a private luncheon in the queen's chambers with the queen and the king. And he went home and he gathered all his friends and neighbors and family together, and he told them how wonderful he was, and how much money he'd made, how his career was taking off and booming. And they celebrated how well Haman was doing. The only moth in his Persian rug was Mordecai. And they decided they weren't going to wait until December 13th to get rid of this Mordecai guy. They were going to do it right away. They made a gallows out of the big tree in his backyard. And first thing in the morning, Haman was going to talk to Xerxes and get rid of Mordecai. The next thing that happened had never happened before. And it was incredibly unusual. Xerxes had insomnia. He usually slept like a baby. But not tonight. He calls me about 3 in the morning. Harbona! Harbona! And I get up and go in and say, yeah, what is it, Xerxes? I can't sleep. Read something to me. How about the annals of your reign? That should do it. Fine, read. And so I went and got the scroll, opened it up, and I started reading. About 15 minutes in, there was a curious passage. It talked about how the Jewish representative on his way to council one day overheard a plot to assassinate Xerxes. And this Jewish representative, Mordecai, had warned the queen and foiled the plot. He perked up at that. Oh, I kind of remember that. What did we do for the guy? I don't know. Scanned ahead a few paragraphs. Doesn't seem like we did anything. Well, we got to fix that. We got to fix that. Tell me, first thing in the morning. Remind me, first thing in the morning. We've got to fix that. Okay. Wow. The king wants to honor him. Haman wants to hang him. I can't wait for tomorrow. The next day, Xerxes didn't need to be reminded. He was up early, starting court. And he said, are there any royal officials out there waiting? And somebody said, oh yeah, Haman's here. Haman was there very early too. He wanted to be first. Haman comes hopping in, and before he can say a thing, Xerxes says, Haman, there's a man in this kingdom that I owe a great debt to. How can I possibly repay him? How can I honor him? And of course, Haman, with his ego, thought it was him. And he said, oh, yes, Xerxes. If we're really going to do this right, we need to take this man, whoever he might be, and put the royal robe, the robe that you wear for royal occasions, on his shoulders. Put a gold crown on his head, and put him on the king's stallion, and have some leading official take him through the city streets, calling out, this is how the king honors the man he wants to honor. Xerxes says, I like it. I like it. You're a high official. Go find that guy Mordecai and do those things that you said to him. And Haman, I owe this guy an incredible debt. So shout loud. You should have seen Haman's face. From excited to crushed. He turned to go out of the room. Xerxes says to me, is Haman feeling okay? No, I don't think so. We heard glowing reports all day about Haman's little parade through the city. And when lunchtime came, he was done with his parade and getting to go to the queen's chambers again. He had kind of gotten over it. He pulled himself together pretty well. And we got to the lunch, and again, it was a good lunch, and it was nice. And as they were lingering over dessert, the king looked at Esther very tenderly and said, Esther, I know something's wrong. I want to fix it. What can I do for you? What can I give you? And I thought, here it comes. And that's right. O king, you can give me my life and the life of my people. For we are about to be killed and destroyed and annihilated. You should have seen Haman's face. Every one of those words, killed, destroyed, and annihilated, was like a slap in his face. The shock on his face was incredible. And Xerxes says, who would do such a thing? And she said, Haman, with his decree. The king was immediately furious, but he didn't act on it. He went out onto the terrace to gather himself and to gather his thoughts. And as soon as he left the room, Haman was talking. Esther, I'm sorry. Esther, I didn't know. Esther, if I didn't, I'm so sorry. And she turned from him and got up and started walking away. And he followed her. And he fell down and he was pulling at her. Esther, please, Esther, please, please. And she pulled away and he grabbed her again. And when he did, at that moment, Xerxes came in, took one look, got the wrong idea. You dare molest the queen in my palace? Cover his face. Cover his face was the death sentence. It's the death shroud. I spoke up then. It felt kind of safe. And I said, you know, Haman built a gallows out of that big tree in his backyard. Hang him on it. And it was done. In Persia, you could never take back a law. Once it's law, it's law. You can, however, issue another law to counteract that law. And so the law that Xerxes passed said that on the 13th of December, the Jews could not only defend themselves, but they could band together and attack enemies, any enemy that they had, and take their stuff, and the government would look the other way. Or you should have heard the rejoicing in the streets when that thing went out. I'm standing at the window, thinking back on what had happened in the last couple of days. The two lunches, Xerxes not being able to sleep, and Mordecai's name showing up. And they're saying, Esther saying the right thing at the right time. It's very peculiar. All those things came together. And I thought to myself, those Jews, they sure are lucky. Now to the King eternal, immortal, invisible, the only wise God, be glory and honor forever